Hello, I'm Esther Gidhu-Ewart. It's Thursday, December 22nd. This is Africa 54. We begin in West Africa, where the Gambian Parliamentary Committee is recommending the country's Medicines Control Agency blacklist Maiden Pharmaceuticals and ban all their products in the Gambian market, while an investigation is ongoing into the cause of the deaths of children who suffered acute kidney injuries. The agency is convinced that Maiden Pharmaceuticals is culpable and should be held accountable for exporting the contaminated medicines linked to the death of at least 70 children in Gambia in 2022. Gambia has already recalled all cough and cold syrups in circulation in the country, as well as all pharmaceutical products manufactured by Maiden Pharmaceuticals, whose production plant in India has been shut down. Maiden Pharmaceuticals Director Naresh Goyal has reportedly denied the deaths were caused by cough syrups produced at his company. An Ivory Coast prosecutor is urging life in prison for 4 suspects in one of West Africa's most violent jihadist attacks, a 2016 machine gun assault on a beach resort that killed 19 people. Richard Adu is demanding a life sentence for the defendants. He says it would be an exemplary and dissuasive punishment. He is also asking for a life sentence for 14 other suspects being tried in absentia. Many of those suspects are either on the run or being held in neighboring Mali. The verdict is expected soon. It was seen as one of the most significant announcements made at the recent U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. U.S. President Joe Biden saying he would support the African Union joining the G20 and securing a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. Hilda Suka-Mafuze, the African Union ambassador to the United States, says it's vital that African nations act collectively on the international stage. Hayde Adams, host of VOA Straight Talk Africa, spoke to the AU ambassador here in Washington and asked her what the AU sees as top priority in its engagement with the U.S.
We are looking at the health issue. The more we are healthier, yes, we'll be able to work. Then we can do trade when we are healthy. So we are looking at a situation whereby we build. It's a global challenge at the moment, having us woken up by the COVID-19, that we should, if leadership agree, build a global health entity where each and every country, we know what is happening. I'll give you an example of what Africa CDC did in Africa. They knew how to coordinate each and every minister of health in each and every country in Africa. We are saying, why can't we do that at the global level? And they say, we are sure. Imagine what happened with COVID-19. The minute it was announced in China, it took a few hours. It was here in the US. It was on Africa. It was in South America. So that's a priority, which us as a continent, we have said, let's put that on the table. It has been an issue that we run with. Us having the challenge of not vaccinating all our people, where did that come from? It's because we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the health systems, we don't have the medications to cover our populations on the continent.
And COVID exposed so many other...
All those things. We learned a lesson. That was quite a lesson, in which I'm impressed. African Union has put that out, and with the member states, and the US is buying in to say yes. In regards to the issue of health, we've got to work together. These are priorities of the world today, the global priorities.
Hayde also asked Ambassador Suka-Mafuze what her advice for Biden-Harris administration would be.
You're also saying that Africans are actually today telling the world how they want to be treated, how they want to be engaged, and what they bring to the stage, to the global economy. What would your advice be to President Biden about how we should engage Africa, the single most important thing you think he should do?
is to embrace Africa as quickly as possible. As quickly as possible. I'm happy with what is happening. It's getting there. But let's get, I would say, get stronger. Get stronger and be on that continent. Yes, we have Ubuntu ourselves as Africans. We receive everyone who comes to us, who will come with good things. We will gravitate towards. So I'll say to President Biden, this is the time. Don't be left out. Showcase who you are. Africa is watching and is cognizant of who they are and what they want and what their value is. So let's meet some way to correct that, to put things in place, to make ourselves benefit both ways.
That was the African Union ambassador to the United States, Hilda Suka-Mafuze, speaking to the host of VOA Straight Talk Africa, Hayde Adams, here in Washington. Tomorrow, we'll bring you part 2 of their conversation. Now, for more on the gains and missed opportunities at the just concluded U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, I'm joined by Daniel Kawuma. He is the National Unity Platform Leader, USA, and a native of Uganda. Daniel, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, you're very welcome. You participated in this Leaders Summit. You know, the diaspora was very, very engaged in it.
Absolutely.
But what were the main takeaways for the continent of Africa?
The main takeaways is that the United States wants to re-engage with Africa after several years where China has been dominating the scene on the continent. We have seen bilateral trade between the Africa continent and China rise to 35% from 2008 to 2021, while that of the US had declined from about 140 billion US dollars to 61 billion US dollars. So the United States had to re-engage with Africa, and this summit offered an opportunity for them to reach out to African countries as partners, as equal partners, at least that's what the rhetoric says, so they can re-engage in the continent of Africa. And we want the United States to re-engage in Africa because for us who are human rights advocates, you want to stand on the sides of the United States the way we see Ukraine. They are standing up with Ukraine. We had President Zelenskyy yesterday in Washington, D.C. United States is a key ally for us who advocate for rights of African people, and them re-engaging with the continent is crucial. And Biden's commitment of $55 billion was a big takeaway from that summit. But also what we don't want to forget is that human rights are still a priority. Though United States wants to compete with China on the continent, they should not forget that they're the shining city on the hill, and they need to hold our leaders accountable on the continent.
Well, 49 presidents of Africa, that's quite a number. But what would you say were probably some of the missed opportunities that these leaders were not able to tap into from this summit?
There are several missed opportunities. In the grand scheme of things, the AU should have presented an agenda at the summit, which they did not do. All the African countries came with individual agendas, and that creates chaos for the continent because we had this opportunity to challenge the United States to make Africa a priority, but we did not do it as a team, as a bloc. So each country lobbied on its own. Uganda lobbied on its own, and others lobbied on its own. That was a big miss at this summit. As well as the lack of priority on human rights, in my opinion. Most of the human rights organizations were on the sidelines of the summit. Yes, there was some little engagement, but the United States should not go on the low side to attract African countries to the United States. They need to continue prioritizing their value, which is democracy, human rights for Africans, and individual liberties.
I like what you say, because President Biden did tell the African leaders, be careful what you ask for. He said they want him to go to visit all the countries.
Absolutely.
But he's going to be watching that part in particular, human rights and all of that. But tell us about the Biden administration's offer to the diaspora. There's going to be a lot of engagement that was seen previously in other administrations.
Right. The Biden administration has done a great job of engaging the African diaspora. There's a new council through an executive order, which will be the Presidential Advisory Committee for African Diaspora Engagement, that is going to work through the State Department to engage the African diaspora. So that's a big win for us in the diaspora to engage, to have a seat at the table. Secondly, the United States government is also going to invest $100 million in YALI, which is the Youth African Leaders Initiative. And that's going to be a big win as well for the young future generation of Uganda, because the youth are the leaders of tomorrow. Also, the Biden administration is making commitment to support Africa to get a seat on the Security Council at the UN. That's a big win, as well as to be part of the G20. Those are key achievements which we think the African continent can seize on.
So you mentioned Uganda. Did you get a sense that the Ugandan government got to agree on certain issues during this summit in terms of trade, investment between the U.S. and Kampala?
That's an excellent question. As a Ugandan, I was very concerned about our presentation at the summit. We have a leader who has been in power for 36 years, a very unpopular figure on the continent. And as time has gone on, we have seen what's happening on the streets of Uganda. There's abduction of civilians, there's human rights violations. And so when he came to DC, he failed to advocate for the bulk of our population. Average age of Ugandans is 17 years old. So what we want are initiatives that are going to mobilize that base, create job opportunities for those young people so that they do not flock to embassies to get visas.
Daniel, why do you say that? There is a room called the deal room. And
right.
This is where the presidents of Africa and the U.S. officials, the private sector, were making deals.
Right.
Want to tell me there was nothing that Uganda put on the table?
They're advertising a deal for an oil refinery for Uganda, which was $4 billion US. But that deal was signed in 2018. That's what they're saying is their signature achievement. There were a couple other deals as far as inviting investors to Uganda and opening up trade channels. But the priority for Uganda at the moment should have been tapping into the resources the Biden administration is offering, particularly for young people, for renewable energy, especially the green economy. That's the future of our continent. And as Uganda being in the Sun Belt, that was a very missed opportunity for our country not to prioritize our young people, not to prioritize the opportunities we need today. And instead, they were marketing, in fact, some of the businesses which they brought to the United States to open markets for. One was for the son-in-law of the president, which also signals what's happening in Uganda, where we have the wife of the president as the Minister of Education,
so
the son as the
because we're
general.
running out of time. Tell
Yes.
me, why did Ugandans hold protests in D.C.?
We protested for a number of reasons. First was the human rights violations that are happening in the continent of Africa, especially in Uganda. We are seeing abductions of civilians on the streets of Uganda today who are part of the opposition. Secondly, free and fair elections. 54 Ugandans were shot on the streets in the recent elections. There hasn't been any accountability. And the third is equal justice under the law.
What about the other parts of Africa? You mentioned that you are protesting because there are other violations going on there, and very briefly.
Yes, we see the situation going on in Egypt with President Sisi. There are many political prisoners in Egypt. We see what's going on in South Sudan as well. When we are marching, we are with people from South Sudan, people from Egypt, people from Sierra Leone. So the human rights violations are happening across the continent, and this should be a priority of the United States as we move forward. So they don't only focus on the economic side of things, so they can also focus on the human rights violations happening, especially in Uganda.
Oh, Daniel, thank you so much for your perspective.
Thank you very much.
Daniel Kawoma is the National Unity Platform leader, USA, and a native of Uganda. UN experts say the ice cap on Africa's tallest peak, Tanzania's Mount Kilimanjaro, is among the famous glaciers predicted to melt by 2050 because of climate change. While scientists are looking into whether they can halt the melting, those who depend on the mountain for tourism worry about the future. Charles Kombe reports from Tanzania.
Julius Keyu has participated in various studies on Mount Kilimanjaro. His studies have revealed changes in the mountain ice cap from time to time.
Utafiti wa muda mrefu.
Many studies that we have carried out show that it is true. The glacier on Mount Kilimanjaro is shrinking.
Theluji.
For locals here, Mount Kilimanjaro is a symbol of fortune, and it brings tens of millions of dollars to the region through 50,000 tourists who climb the mountain annually. However, like glaciers in the Antarctic and Arctic, the ice cap on Mount Kilimanjaro has notably shrunk due to climate change.
sababu itakuwa tumepoteza kivutio kikubwa sana ambacho sisi tunaki.
We'll have lost the biggest tourist attraction and a market that we believe brings a lot of income to our country. Even those who work in the tourism industry, tourists who climb mountains are the ones that bring a lot of money. My biggest fear is that I will lose customers. That's money not only to me, but to the government. We will also lose the light and potential of our mountain.
Tumepoteza nuru ya mlima Kilimanjaro.
Earlier this year, an intergovernmental panel on climate change report listed the melting of ice and snow as one of the 10 key threats from climate change. The United Nations says the glacier could be saved only if the world limits global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
We continue to educate the public on conservation, especially in the villages surrounding the mountain. We have also continued to insist citizens plant many trees in their places to provide for themselves and cope with climate change.
Meanwhile, KU believes that the glacier, while shrinking, will survive. The studies on the ice cap have been done mainly by foreigners and are lacking key experts and pieces of equipment, he says. The people who work in Tanzania's tourism industry hope he is correct. Charles Kombe for VOA News in Kilimanjaro, Tanzania.
Let us know what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, remembering a time when Burkina Faso's residents could enjoy watching films at a local cinema. We'll be back.
As the world continues to experience a post-COVID global recession and food prices constantly rising, what do small-scale vendors such as street food vendors do to stay afloat? In Africa, women are known to be the drivers of the informal economy, and street food vending is one of the trades in which they excel. This week, we speak to women vendors and look at the challenges they face and how they try to overcome them. All of that and more on this week's episode of Our Voices.
Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In other news, Nigeria's central bank has a substantially increased limit it had set on weekly cash withdrawals as part of an effort to curb the use of cash. Individuals are now allowed to withdraw up to 500,000 naira or $1,100 weekly. Police and Al-Shabaab radio say Al-Shabaab fighters attacked a police vehicle in eastern Kenya, killing 2 officers and 1 civilian. Several others were injured in the attack. And Somalia says the first group of 5,000 Somalis sent to Eritrea for military training has returned home to the relief of parents who had alleged their sons had been recruited under false pretenses. Ukrainian President Vlodomyr Zelensky's address to the U.S. lawmakers, and he also met with President Joe Biden Wednesday in Washington in a dramatic visit to the United States. Zelensky's visit was aimed at rallying his top international partner to sustain its military and economic assistance in Ukraine's war against Russia. White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara reports.
President Joe Biden welcomed President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House on Wednesday in a surprise visit designed to send a message to Russian President Vladimir Putin that the United States will be there for Ukraine for as long as it takes.
He's trying to use winter as a weapon, but the Ukrainian people continue to inspire the world. I mean that sincerely. Not just inspire us, but inspire the world with their courage and how they have chose the resilience and resolve for their future.
Zelensky thanked Biden and gave him a Cross for Military Merit medal that belonged to a Ukrainian soldier, captain of a HIMARS battery given by the U.S.
He's very brave, and he said, give it to a very brave president. And I want to give you that is the Cross for Military Merit.
As Zelensky touched down on U.S. soil on his first trip abroad since the Russian invasion began in February, the U.S. announced $1.85 billion in additional security assistance for Ukraine, including the Patriot defense system that will help protect against Russian missiles, a move Moscow calls provocative. On Wednesday, Putin said Russia had nothing to be blamed for on the war.
On the contrary, this is the result of the policy of other countries, third countries, which have always striven for this, towards the disintegration of the Russian world.
In remarks before a joint meeting of Congress, Zelenskyy appealed to U.S. lawmakers who are debating another $45 billion in emergency aid to Ukraine, which would bring the total American wartime assistance to more than $100 billion.
Your money is not charity. It's an investment in the global security and democracy that we handle in the most responsible way.
A recent Chicago Council poll finds that while 65% of Americans continue to support U.S. assistance to Ukraine, they're split between supporting for as long as it takes and wanting Washington to urge Kyiv to settle for peace as soon as possible. Patsy, Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
There was anger and disappointment in Goma, Democratic Republic of Congo, Wednesday after the United Nations Security Council voted to extend their peacekeeping mission. Ndiho has more.
The United Nations Security Council has unanimously adopted 2 resolutions, one renewing the mandate of the UN's Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, also called MONUSCO, for 1 year, and another lifting the notification requirement under the arms embargo. Speaking to reporters outside the council before the vote, the French ambassador said the mission would focus its robust mandate on protecting civilians.
La première résolution va renouveler pour 1 an le mandat de la MONUSCO.
The mission will focus its robust mandate on the protection of civilians, the support for disarmament and reintegration of armed groups, and security sector reform. MONUSCO will also be able to provide support for the general election in December 2023. In addition, it will continue its task of monitoring the situation of human rights, supporting the judicial system, and the fight against impunity.
MONUSCO was the target of deadly protests by Congolese who said armed groups were still roaming the country's east and were not being protected. Some people are unhappy with the new mandate. I don't see how MONUSCO can have another mandate when it hasn't done anything. It's been 22 years and there is no protection. In Rushuru, people died while MONUSCO is there to protect civilians. In July, hundreds of people blocked roads while chanting anti-UN slogans before storming the headquarters of the UN peacekeeping mission. Protesters also set fire outside the gates of MONUSCO in Goma and a logistical base on the city outskirts. The resolution extending the UN peacekeeping mission until December 2023 strongly condemns all domestic and foreign armed groups operating in the country and demands that they immediately cease all violence and destabilizing actions and the illegal exploitation and trafficking of natural resources. Activist Jack Sizhera says the government had bowed to the international community and the situation in Congo is now worse than when MONUSCO arrived in 2000.
This mission found only 2 armed groups when it arrived, and today we have more than 400. The population has expressed the effective departure of this criminal mission. Still, by surprise, we do not understand the government that continues to bow to international community's will, which is only there to plunder the Congo and massacre Congolese at the expense of their interests. The government has renewed MONUSCO's mandate again, and we are saying no, not in North Kivu.
The UN Security Council also voted to lift a notification requirement on some arms purchases. The separate resolutions were approved amid worsening concerns in the mineral-richer eastern region, rife with rebel groups and an upsurge in violence and civilian killings that has uprooted tens of thousands of its inhabitants. Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Film producer Drissa Toure peered through the locked glass doors of what was once the lively cinema in Burkina Faso's southwestern city of Bobo Dioulasso and remembered a time when locals could enjoy films from Africa and beyond on its screen. Olivia Chan has more.
Film producer Drissa Touré peered through the locked glass doors of what was once the lively cinema in Burkina Faso's southwestern city of Bobo-Dioulasso. He remembered a time when locals could enjoy films from Africa and beyond on its screen. But after a jihadist insurgency that has gained ground since 2015, the government was forced to divert money from arts and culture to security spending. The building is no longer used as a cinema and is instead rented out for conferences and weddings. Today, the 70-year-old struggles with respiratory illness and ekes out a living ferrying people and parcels on his scooter.
It was that desire, that need to give that dream to people so they can grow in their field. That was cut off. And I didn't have anyone to support me. And that made me sick. I developed a respiratory problem.
Historically, Burkina Faso has clout in Africa's film industry, with several feature productions landing international awards over past decades. It has also hosted the renowned biannual Pan-African Film Festival, FESPACO, in the capital Ouagadougou, which was suspended this year due to political instability following 2 coups. Earlier this month, a new film festival was organized in Bobo-Dioulasso, where Touré was a judge. Years ago, the excitement at the cinema was palpable in the city, the country's cultural capital, where film producers and cinephiles abounded. Touré's first long feature, Lada, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 1991. He was invited back in 1995 for another film, Haramuya, set in the capital. He recalled a golden era when he met African film stars and travelled to the United States and was invited to Cannes. Touré said participating in the festival felt like being reborn.
I was able to regenerate myself because I believe. I have my archives here, my therapy. When interesting people say sincere and true things about you, that regenerates you. You believe in yourself. It's more than medicine. That's what built me back up, and I still believe.
That was Olivier Chan of Reuters reporting. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.